least, is Christy Wessel Powell, and she is a second-year Ph.D. student in the LCLE department. Prior to coming to IU, she began her teaching career in the Teach for America program. She was an early elementary classroom teacher for 6 years in public, private, and charter schools in Chicago, Philadelphia, and New York. And her academic interests include primary literacy, comparative education as it relates to the charter school movement, and arts and technology integration, and popular media. And she's particularly interested in popular, persuasive nonfiction packaged to stimulate grassroots social change.
Thank you for that introduction. So today my presentation focuses on research about education and action at the movies. And specifically, I'm going to describe viewer reactions that I collected to about the documentary film Waiting for Superman. So just before I begin, a quick show of hands. How many people have seen Waiting for Superman? Did anyone see it at IU? Has anyone just heard of the film? Okay, for those of you that are maybe unfamiliar or just having a hard time remembering, here's a quick synopsis.
I want to be a nurse. I want to be a doctor.
How come?
Because I would like to help somebody in need.
You wake up every morning and you know that kids are getting a really crappy education right now.
So you think that most of the kids are getting a crappy education right now?
Oh, I don't think they are. I know they are.
Either the kids are getting stupider every year, or something is wrong in the education system.
I just try to do my best at school and make my grandmother proud.
Among 30 developed countries, we rank 25th in math and 21st in science. In almost every category, we've fallen behind, except one. Kids from the USA rank #1 in confidence.
I think about 60,000 people have gone to the school in 40 years. 40,000 didn't graduate. This is the damage that this school has done to this neighborhood.
A child that doesn't finish high school will earn less and be 8 times more likely to go to prison.
I want to go to school.
For these kids, their only chance at getting into a great school depends on whether their number is picked in the lottery.
So if Francisco doesn't get in, is there another chance?
No.
Your children and future generations are on the bridge of the Titanic and everybody's going to drown.
Someone is taking an interest in you, someone loves you, and they recognize the importance of education. And the first student selected,
20. 9.
It takes a lot of outrage and a lot of good examples to say, yes, we can do this.
When you see a great teacher, you are seeing a work of art.
I want my kids to have better than what I had.
18. 10. 12. 2. And the last number.
Okay, I've seen that a million times, but I can't help but still be kind of emotionally affected, and so that kind of just gives you a sense of what some of these audience reactions are going to look like. So my Waiting for Superman study is kind of a case study on the effects of popular, persuasive nonfiction texts. I'm interested in this larger notion of popular, persuasive nonfiction. I want to know more about how and why these texts are consumed and what effects they might be capable of producing in society. And what's interesting is a subset of these texts are intentionally packaged to influence public discourse and to encourage social action by providing a variety of resources for the audience to follow up with. It makes it easier for them to act socially, engage with an issue, keep the conversation going through take action websites, videos, public events, text alerts, etc. So I'm interested in just how effective these resources are, and my research focus for this particular project is to shed light on the relationship between popular media and public opinion regarding the topic of education. And so I did that by examining Waiting for Superman reactions. And today I'm going to have the additional focus on pre-service teachers and implications for teacher education. Because pre-service teachers made up a large chunk of my participants. So in the literature, there's already work done about movies that teach societal norms and public discourse on education and encourage social action. There's also already been work done specifically on Waiting for Superman's argumentative flaws and its unvoiced agenda. And so what I found is that what was missing from the literature were viewer responses, and so that's where my study fits in. I want to tell you a little bit about my theoretical model I'm using to situate my work in the literature. I'm using this is Johnson's cultural circuit model. I'm using it because it fits well with the ways that I want to examine how Waiting for Superman has kind of done a flow through society. So it has 4 points to step in and ask questions about what's going on here as a text or a cultural product circulates in society. The first point, the question is, what are the conditions of production? The second point, the question is, what are the possible meanings of this product? At the third point, you can ask, what are the interpretations of the product by various cultural groups? And at the fourth point, the question becomes, what effects does the product have on the routine practices of various cultural groups? So there's already been work done at the first 2 points of entry. So I'm going to show those, and my work focuses on entry points 3 and 4. So at entry point number 1, what are the conditions of production? Diane Ravitch, Kate Swalwell, and Michael Apple have already written articles questioning who the Waiting for Superman producers are and what interest they had in making this text. On the second entry point, what are the possible meanings of this product? Hurley, Karp, and others have already written about the possible critical ratings of this product. So my work addresses this third point, what are the interpretations of the product by various culture groups, and specifically I'm interested in how different groups like teachers, pre-service teachers, community members, etc., interpret the text, and do they take up the same possible reading with that group. And I also focus on point number 4, what effects does the product have on the practices of these groups. And specifically, my focus here is asking what effects does it have on the practices of teachers, pre-service teachers. In other words, does watching the film make certain groups of people want to act differently afterward? So I want to contextualize this research a little bit. First of all, I observed 4 on-campus screenings of Waiting for Superman and accompanying panel discussions. And I created a thick record of those events. At the events, I collected 168 surveys of viewers, and then I conducted 22 follow-up focus group and individual interviews with select homogeneous groups of viewers, teachers, pre-service teachers, graduate students, professors in the field of education and outside the field of education, etc. It's also important to know that these screenings happened this time last year, and so in this legislative session, in last year's legislative session, Senate Bill 1, among other state bills about education, were on the docket, and Senate Bill 1 is one that did pass. And it was contentious because it addresses things like a merit pay system for teachers, relaxed regulation for teacher licensure, so charter schools can have up to 50% of their teachers unlicensed by the state, an evaluation system for teachers that fires ineffective teachers based on test scores over the course of 2 years if they don't improve, and requirement for teachers grades K through 6 to be trained in scientifically researched reading curricula. So collective bargaining rights were a big issue also. There were teacher protests going on and legislative walkouts, most famously in Wisconsin, but they were happening in New Jersey and they were happening in Indiana too. So I just tell you this to let you know that this stuff showed up in my surveys. The effects of the political friction. So the data that I'm going to focus on today is pulled from this one-page survey that I passed out at the screenings, and specifically on the first question. I know it's kind of small. It's just a free write answer to the question, what are your initial reactions to the film? So people could just write whatever they wanted, and I took those free written responses and I put them into a program called Deduce, and it helped me do coding. So I used this emergent coding system. These are some of the patterns that I saw come up again and again. And when I say emergent coding scheme or coding system, I mean that these were taken from the participants' own words. So that's where I got these. So there were comments that people wrote that were an actual reaction to the film. People said they were, they expressed that they were critical, they were skeptical, they thought it was biased in some way. People also said that they learned something new after watching it. People talked about agreeing with certain aspects of the film because they've seen it with their own eyes in schools. People said that they loved it. They said that it was well made, just talking about its cinematography. There were also a lot of comments that had emotional aspects to them, happy, sad, worried, that they felt heartfelt or inspired. And they were either in response to just an issue in education that the film evoked or the film itself. There were comments that included, that there were questions that people wrote down, either about an issue in education or the film itself, or a lot of people also commented about they wanted to help fix the problems that they saw, but they didn't know what to do about it, and they were unsure how to help after seeing the film. And then there were motivated or inspired comments that people wanted to help out, kind of a subset of the emotional comments there. And then there were comments that kind of reflected the film's, one of the film's messages, which was there is a need for reform here, and tenure and unions are specifically in need of reform. So here are my results. Just overall, this is just a quick word cloud that I threw everyone's comments into, and so you can kind of see a lot of the terms that came up again and again. But to give you an idea of who participated, overall, my respondents were young and female. Over half of the respondents were ages 18 to 24, 75% were under the age of 34. I say they were at least 54% female because 14% of people didn't indicate male or female, so it could be higher. Here's a quick breakdown of the types of viewers I had. So I had a lot of undergraduates, 66, this is 168. A lot of pre-service teachers, and this is not mutually exclusive, so I could have undergraduate pre-service teachers or graduate pre-service teachers, but the bulk of the audience were undergrads, a lot of grad students, lots of pre-service teachers came, less professors, less community members, very few current teachers, few parents, so these are people who responded. And just to give you an idea of overall collective reactions, 30% of these comments mentioned that they were skeptical or critical. And this is not a Likert scale, they just brought it up on their own. 20% said that they learned something new in some way, 15% were inspired or motivated after watching the film, and 15% loved it. But it's important to note, and what I thought was very interesting was the majority of the responses were complex and nuanced, meaning they weren't just flat, one-dimensional responses. They, for example, like 38% of the audience either said they agreed with parts of the film, they loved the film, they learned something from the film, yet of those, of that group, almost half of them qualified their praise with some form of critique or skepticism. So it's just an example of critical literacy and practice, and it was neat to see come up. So here are a few quotes that kind of illustrate that multifaceted idea. So I'll let you just read those for a few seconds to give you a sense of what. So now let's look more specifically at pre-service teachers. They represented over half of all the people who were inspired. Half of them were pre-service teachers, or of all the pre-service teachers, 22% of those guys were inspired by the film. They were the most emotional group out of all the respondents, which was interesting too. 37% of them had an emotional response of some sort. 25% mentioned learning something new, and many of them also said that they were grateful to have the opportunity to learn something new about these issues, which was interesting. There was also a lot of confusion about what should I believe, and it's not surprising since there are a lot of conflicting and highly politicized issues that come out of viewing this film. So that was a common theme that I saw from pre-service teachers. However, I don't want to paint the picture that they didn't have critical aspects to their responses as well. There were definitely examples of pre-service teachers who used the film to enter into the conversation, and then there were also pre-service teachers who had an element of criticality. So here are some quotes that kind of illustrate that. So on the left, there are pre-service teachers who agreed or were convinced by the film's claims, and they use this to enter the conversation about these issues. Mm-hmm. And then on the right are more critical stances. So there are some implications here for teacher education. Number one, using popular persuasive nonfiction like Waiting for Superman is a good way to reach a large audience of pre-service teachers. They're definitely accessible, and if there's an interest or a buzz about the film or the text, or there's some social aspect to the event, then it's even more appealing, and there's some form of them being informational. Number two, a multi-perspective panel is important for contextualizing the information that's given in these texts. So that's definitely something that needs to be considered when these events are planned. And then number three, creating opportunities to continue the conversation is helpful for many pre-service teachers. Pre-service teachers brought this up most often whenever they came to talk with me more in focus group settings. They really appreciated the chance to develop some of their thinking around these issues by talking more. So I also think that this is an important caveat. Pre-service teachers aren't blank slates, so they definitely do come to these texts with their own experiences and backgrounds, values, and they don't necessarily need to be protected from dangerous political discourses that we might perceive initially as their instructors. They're capable of making their own sense of these issues, especially when they're given opportunities to develop their thinking more and have some of those multiple perspectives contextualize it a little bit more. So in conclusion, popular persuasive nonfiction texts like Waiting for Superman can be an effective way to begin conversations about topics of interest. And contextualization and socialization seem to be really important factors for learning to be more likely to occur. So this study kind of shows the power and the limitations of popular media around social issues, and I'm interested in hearing what feedback you might have for me, and particularly I'm interested in future research designs that might come to mind. I'd like to think more about effective ways to look at these type of texts. But any questions or feedback you might have, I'd be glad to take those.
Could I ask you just for the full audience to explain what a charter school is? And I can't remember,
Yes.
there was one other thing that I thought might be helpful for folks to understand. But I'll come back to that.
Yeah, so briefly, just in my most general way that I can explain a charter school is that it's a school that takes both private and public funds to run. They can look very different. They can run from partial or almost exclusively on corporate funds. There are management companies that run chains of charter schools across the nation, but they can also be local, like here at, in Bloomington there's the Project School, and that's a charter school that just has one location. So charter schools are both publicly and privately funded schools. And one of the issues around charter schools is that they don't have to adhere to some of the regulations that public schools might have to. Like I mentioned, that charter schools can hire teachers under different parameters than public schools have the ability to do. Like they can hire uncertified teachers. They sometimes have different testing and accountability things that they're liable to.
And then the second one was, there was a follow-up panel, right? You mentioned
Yes.
a panel, so I think that's helpful for the context.
Yeah, so that is, thanks for bringing that up. The panel was a big part of these events, and they looked different at each screening, but basically, after the audience watched the movie, then there was about an hour-long discussion with, there was usually a teacher on every panel. There were professors from the School of Education. There was, at one of the events, there were policy professor from SPIA. There were representatives from the state of Indiana Department of Education at a couple of the events. One of the events was a Teach for America Recruitment Week screening, and so they had core members from Teach for America on the event, or on the panel discussing. And so those people just kind of went down the line and gave their initial reactions to the film and filled in any information that they thought was missing or twisted in certain ways, or what they thought was valid or not.
So did they do the questionnaires before that panel, or did they do them?
Well, the interesting thing is that not everybody stayed for the panel.
Okay.
So that's kind of a limitation for some of the, so some people clearly, like in their feedback, had stayed for the entire event, and they were referencing things they'd heard in the panel and bouncing that off of what they saw in the movie. And so that was richer than some of the other comments. But you know, I had no way of knowing like who had dropped theirs off when, other than it was at the bottom of the pile.
So there's no way to, you know, that you could measure how much that influenced when it gives their initial reaction to the film. How much was that what their actual initial reaction was, or after they processed that through the panel?
Yeah, that was a big thing that I learned whenever, like at the first panel, it was pretty chaotic. There were people sitting in the aisles everywhere, and I was trying to pass out the questionnaires before, and I was just a little bit everywhere, and so I learned that ideally it would be great if there was a more structured thing where I could get everyone's reactions, you know, after the film, and everyone's reactions after the talk or something. That would be great. That would be ideal, but maybe for the future I could
Or just check if you stayed for the panel or didn't stay. At least you have a little bit of a sorting mechanism.
That would be so helpful.
And you didn't know if they had seen it before, if that was the first time they saw it?
A couple people offered up that they'd seen it before, but other than that, I did have a part of the questionnaire that asked why they came, and but yeah, I didn't have a specific thing that addressed if they'd seen it before.
Because you don't know, it may not have influenced them at all.
Yeah, it's true.
It might have influenced you. Those are hard things to say about the design.
Yeah, there were a lot of unknowns, I guess. I wasn't able to, I can't say a lot of definites with just a quick little paragraph someone might have put on there.
So, Christy, what we saw here today were your written comments that were strictly from the forums, right?
Yes.
Not necessarily your interviews or your focus groups or things like that. And I'm really struck by those comments that seem to be double voiced.
Yeah.
You know, and it just reminds me of, you know, just we're going to be positive no matter what. You know, that kind of a almost identity statement. And so, you know, I wouldn't cast it as teacher pleasing, but I would certainly say, you know, it might just be always looking for that silver lining that they feel that expectation from us in some ways. So I think as you're thinking about focus groups, you might think about some ways that you can get conversation going among them where you're maybe out of the conversation. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to.
That was the goal during focus groups. Barbara Dennis kind of coached. I
Okay.
was in, she did this in the 6-12, I think, class and ran the entire group through it, but kind of specifically coached me on how to, and it was really tricky. I'd never done it before. I don't know if anybody's ever done focus groups, but it's really hard to stay out of the conversation because I was so like, I think that too, you know.
Yeah, I know, because you get excited and like, oh yeah, another thing.
Yeah.
But it really was the best if they kept it going and ran with things. But I'm always there, and they always know that. So.
Well, my question was very related. I was just really interested in the role of reflexivity for you as a researcher that played in this. In terms of, I mean, my feeling was a lot of the students were really interested in why you weren't doing this research, right? Like, does she love the movie? Does she love charter? Like, actually, I'm wondering that back here, right? I'm thinking like, oh, Christy's interest is charter schools. Does that mean she likes them? So I'm curious, and that wasn't present in this presentation either. So I'm curious if you thought through that and if you think perhaps trying to appear neutral is a better thing, or if you're planning on kind of writing where you stand or your impact, the movie's impact on you. But I do see the danger of bringing that into focus groups, so perhaps being transparent isn't always the best thing, but I was just curious.
I tried to be as transparent as possible, but that was a huge part of what I had to grapple with this entire project, because I really wanted to hear from people, and I wanted that to be the message that I was sending about why I'm doing the research. I want to gather information, but people were very interested in, why are you doing this? What is this project? Tell me more. Yeah, like, are you in with the producers? No. But I do have an interest in charter schools because I had a very variable experiences at my charter schools. I taught at 2 charter schools, and so I mean, we can talk about it later, but I have a lot of things to say about charters, and I don't think that they're all one size fits all. They're not all the same,
right?
But there are definitely a lot of this can spark great conversation about that, but I didn't want that to be the focus of what the group was talking about, so I tried to present it that I was going to be getting their information. But you're right, it really, I don't know if anyone has dealt with that in their own research before, but maybe I'll come to the point where it seems that giving my participants a clear idea of my own stance, I mean, it colors what they're, I'm silencing what they might bring up, but.
Well, I think that we're getting into this sort of, we don't want to contaminate the data kind of thing, which I think is impossible. It's sort of the, I don't know if there are any Star Trek fans here, but, you know, violate the prime directive, can't contaminate the culture. And I don't think that you necessarily have to have that. You're not really testing, you're not trying to isolate or control a variable, but instead you're trying to account for that so that your reader of the research can also see where you're positioned and maybe, and you should have that present as you analyze the data and think Yeah. But, you know, you can really tie yourself up in knots trying to be, you know, out of it, in it, when you're, you know, you're clearly involved. Okay.
Yeah, that's fair.
No Star Trek fans, really?
I'm just curious, maybe I didn't get it. Do you know if the filmmakers are still doing some follow-ups of those children into their
Yes,
lives?
on their Take Action website, you can see their progress now that they're, so some of them made it to charter schools and some didn't, and they have little films about their lives now, follow-up interviews and stuff.
Is that the same children?
Yes, the same children, they're older and, yeah. So, yeah, I think that they envision this to be like a long-term campaign, and they keep producing more and more material. There's active Twitter feed and Facebook, and all that stuff too. So, yeah.
Well, speaking of your own role in this, you've seen the film how many times
I've
now?
seen the film a lot.
Yeah. And does your perspective shift in these different iterations?
You know, one of the...
Especially after a panel discussion, etc.
Yeah, it's definitely...
It sort of gets at accounting for your own position and voice and so on, yeah.
I think that, well, one thing that is kind of related to that that's really stuck out to me is that the rhetoric around the film was a lot more powerful than actually seeing the film and shaking my fist at the film, because I've just come to think of the limited nature of the form, that it's this long, and these people have made it, and they have one thing that they'd like to say, and so the way I think about it is that not everybody has seen this film like 10 or 15 times like I have, and so I think that there's selective information for sure, and it's taking a definite perspective, and there's more to know than just that. But
that might
part
be
of
an
the-
interesting thing to portray in your write-up of this, the study, and allowing the readers to see that you've had these experiences, but then you've also seen the film different times in different ways after certain kinds of comments have come in, and then how that may have impacted your own thinking.
yeah, that's a good idea.
Something that I'm just reading a book for my course with Dr. D'Amico about information overload, so I think that might be a nice entry into this idea of persuasive nonfiction. We had a great term, persuasive nonfiction, popular persuasive nonfiction. So this idea, again, that students often, or readers often feel like, there's so many texts telling me different things, I don't know what to believe, right? And so, I don't know, to me that seems like somehow an interesting connection to this idea of overload, and like how do we, I don't know if you're looking for like literature entries, but that might be like an interesting thing.
Yeah, I've heard good things about that class.
I'm thinking a lot about. And also, I keep thinking how interesting it would be to check back in with the people you focus grouped with, like next year, or like to let a big space happen, and then kind of come back and see how feelings have evolved, how seeing that movie has impacted the classes they've taken, the way they've thought about, where they want to see, I don't know, but
that'd be really
something about
interesting,
having a space between, and I'm curious if,
if they can even remember what it's about, or if they have little talking points that they picked up and they keep using those.
I just have no
or
idea.
whatever.
Yeah.
That'd be neat. Thank you, Julie. I appreciate that.
This is really good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all for coming, and we have one more